The morning mist clung to the Afghan mountains like smoke from a dying fire. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her scope for the third time, watching the valley below through the crosshairs of her M24 sniper rifle. The ridge she occupied offered perfect overwatch of the supply route that wound through the rocky terrain like a brown snake. Her spotter, Corporal Jake Mitchell, lay beside her with his binoculars trained on the same area. They had been in position since 0400 hours, part of a routine security patrol that was supposed to be nothing more than another boring day of watching empty roads. "Contact," Mitchell whispered, his voice barely audible even to Santos, who lay just 2 feet away. 3 vehicles approaching from the north. "Looks like civilian trucks." Santos shifted her rifle slightly, finding the lead vehicle in her scope. The trucks moved slowly, struggling up the steep incline. Nothing seemed unusual about them. Local farmers often used this route to transport goods between villages. "Wait," Mitchell's voice carried a new tension. "Check the tree line on the eastern slope." Movement. Santos swung her rifle toward the coordinates Mitchell had indicated. Through her scope, she caught glimpses of figures moving between the rocks and sparse vegetation. They were trying to stay hidden, but their movements were too coordinated to be civilians. "I count at least 12, maybe 15 hostiles," she reported into her radio. "They're setting up an ambush position overlooking the supply route." The response crackled back immediately from Lieutenant Thompson, who was leading the main patrol 2 clicks south of their position. "Copy that. Overlook. Can you confirm hostile intent?" Santos continued watching through her scope. The figures were definitely armed, carrying what looked like AK-47s and at least 1 RPG launcher. They were positioning themselves in a classic L-shaped ambush formation, waiting for the civilian trucks to enter the kill zone. "Confirmed hostile intent," Santos transmitted. "They're armed and in ambush positions. The civilian convoy is walking into a trap. Overlook, you're authorized to engage. Repeat, you're cleared hot." Santos felt her heart rate slow as she entered the zone of calm focus that had made her one of the battalion's most effective snipers. She had been in situations like this before, but never with so many lives hanging in the balance. The civilian drivers had no idea they were about to drive into hell. She selected her first target, a man with an RPG who was crouched behind a large boulder. He was approximately 600 meters away, an easy shot in these conditions. The wind was minimal, and the morning air was clear. Taking the shot, she whispered to Mitchell, who was already calling out wind direction and range estimates. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with a sound that echoed off the surrounding peaks. Through her scope, she saw the target drop. The other insurgents immediately began looking around frantically, trying to locate the source of the gunfire. "Target down," Mitchell confirmed. "The convoy is still approaching. They haven't heard the shot over their engine noise." Santos was already acquiring her second target when Mitchell's voice became urgent. "Maria, we've got a problem. There are more of them. A lot more." She pulled back from her scope to scan the area with her naked eyes. What she saw made her blood run cold. The insurgents they had spotted were just the tip of the iceberg. More fighters were emerging from concealed positions all along the hillside. This wasn't a simple ambush. It was a full-scale attack. "Lieutenant, this is Overlook," she radioed urgently. "We have a major situation here. I count at least 40 hostiles, possibly more. This is bigger than we thought." The response came back filled with static and background noise. Thompson's patrol had obviously encountered their own problems. "Overlook, heavy contact, taking fire from, can't reach your position. Hold your ground." The radio went dead. Santos and Mitchell looked at each other with the grim understanding that they were now completely on their own. The civilian convoy was less than 2 minutes away from entering the kill zone, and there were at least 40 armed insurgents waiting for them. "We need to call for reinforcements," Mitchell said, reaching for the long-range radio. Santos was already back behind her rifle, acquiring targets. "Do it fast. Those trucks are about to get hit, and we're the only thing standing between those civilians and a massacre." Mitchell began transmitting on the emergency frequency while Santos continued engaging targets. Her rifle cracked again, and another insurgent fell. Then again, the sound echoed through the mountains, a deadly rhythm that announced to everyone within miles that a fight had begun. The insurgents were starting to figure out where the shots were coming from. Santos could see them pointing in her direction and beginning to move. Some are breaking off from the main group and starting to climb toward her position. Control. This is Overlook requesting immediate reinforcements, Mitchell transmitted. We have approximately 40 hostiles in contact, civilian convoy in immediate danger. Our position is compromised. Request air support and ground reinforcements immediately. The response was not what they wanted to hear. Overlook, this is Control. All available air assets are committed to operations in Sector 7. Ground reinforcements are minimum 30 minutes out. You're ordered to maintain overwatch and protect civilian assets until support arrives. Santos didn't stop shooting as she processed this information. 30 minutes might as well have been 30 hours. The insurgents were already starting to flank her position, and she could see muzzle flashes as they began returning fire in her direction. The convoy just entered the valley, Mitchell reported. They're in the kill zone now. Santos shifted her aim to the insurgents who were closest to the road. She could see them raising their weapons, preparing to open fire on the unsuspecting trucks. Her rifle spoke again, dropping the nearest threat. Then again, each shot bought the civilians a few more seconds of life. But there were too many insurgents and only one of her. For every target she eliminated, two more seemed to take its place. The sound of automatic weapons fire began echoing through the valley as the ambush commenced. The lead truck suddenly swerved as the driver finally realized they were under attack. Santos could see people jumping from the vehicles, running for whatever cover they could find among the rocks and sparse vegetation. Some weren't fast enough. She saw at least 3 civilians go down in the first volley of enemy fire. We need those reinforcements now, Mitchell transmitted again. Civilians are taking casualties. We cannot hold this position much longer. Santos continued firing, her training taking over as she worked through her magazine with methodical precision. Each shot was carefully aimed, each target selected for maximum impact on the enemy's ability to harm the civilians below. The insurgents were getting closer to her position. She could hear the crack of bullets passing overhead and the ping of rounds hitting the rocks around their hide site. Mitchell had put away the radio and picked up his M4 carbine, preparing to help defend their position. "How much ammo do you have?" he asked during a brief lull in the firing. Santos checked her remaining magazines. 4 mags for the rifle, plus my sidearm. You, 6 mags for the M4. We need to make this last. The sound of diesel engines reached their ears. The civilian drivers are trying to get their trucks turned around, but the narrow road made it almost impossible. One truck had stalled and wouldn't restart. The driver was frantically turning the key while his passengers huddled in the bed of the vehicle. Santos put her scope back on the insurgents who were closest to the stalled truck. They were advancing undercover, getting ready to overrun the civilian position. She began engaging them systematically, forcing them to take cover and buying time for the truck driver to get his engine started. The rifle cracked repeatedly. One insurgent fell, then another. A third dove for cover as Santos's bullet struck the rock inches from his head. The truck engine finally turned over, and the driver began backing frantically down the narrow road. But the insurgents had Santos's position zeroed in now. The volume of incoming fire increased dramatically. Mitchell was firing his carbine in controlled bursts, trying to keep the flanking force from getting too close to their hide site. "They're going to overrun us," he shouted over the gunfire. "We need to displace." Santos knew he was right, but she also knew that if they abandoned this position, the civilians below would be slaughtered. The insurgents would have clear fields of fire on the entire convoy route. Moving meant condemning innocent people to death. "Negative," she replied, chambering another round. "We hold here. Those people down there are counting on us." Mitchell nodded grimly and continued firing. He understood the math as well as she did. They were probably going to die on this ridge, but they were going to take as many insurgents with them as possible. Santos's rifle continued its deadly work. Each shot was a small victory against overwhelming odds, each fallen insurgent one less threat to the civilians below. But the enemy was closing in from 3 sides now, and she could see more fighters moving up the slope toward their position. The radio crackled with an incoming transmission. "Overlook, this is Control. Be advised, reinforcements are en route, but still 25 minutes out. Can you maintain position?" Santos and Mitchell looked at each other. 25 minutes was an eternity in a firefight like this. But the civilians were still in danger, still exposed on the valley floor where the insurgents could cut them to pieces. "Roger, Control," Santos transmitted back. "We'll hold as long as we can." She settled back behind her rifle, scanning for the next target. The thunderous bark of her sniper rifle continued to echo through the mountains, each shot a defiant message to the enemy that this ridge would not fall easily. The insurgents had learned to fear the ridge. Every time one of them exposed himself for more than a few seconds, Santos's rifle would bark and another fighter would fall. But they kept coming, using the rocky terrain to mask their approach as they climbed steadily toward her position. Mitchell was burning through ammunition at an alarming rate. His M4 carbine chattered in short, controlled bursts as he engaged the flanking force that was trying to circle around their eastern side. Spent brass casings littered the ground around their hide site, glinting in the morning sun. "Reloading," Mitchell called out, dropping behind cover to swap magazines. Santos shifted her rifle to cover his sector, scanning for immediate threats. A bearded insurgent with an AK-47 was sprinting between 2 boulders, trying to get closer while Mitchell was changing magazines. Santos led the target slightly and squeezed the trigger. The man tumbled forward and didn't get up. "Back up," Mitchell announced, slapping a fresh magazine into his weapon. The situation below was becoming increasingly desperate. 2 of the civilian trucks had managed to back down the mountain road and escape, but the 3rd truck remained stalled in the valley. Santos could see at least 6 civilians huddled behind the disabled vehicle, using it for cover as insurgent bullets sparked off the metal body. The truck driver was an older man with gray hair who kept trying to restart the engine while bullets whined around him. Each time he turned the key, the engine would sputter but not catch. His passengers, which included what looked like a woman and several children, pressed themselves against the far side of the truck. "I'm about to get down there," Santos muttered, watching the scene through her scope. "Negative," Mitchell replied firmly. "We abandoned this position, and those people are dead for sure. We're the only thing keeping the insurgents from overrunning them." He was right, and Santos knew it. From their elevated position, she could see the entire battlefield. There were at least 30 insurgents still active, maybe more. They were using fire and movement tactics to advance on both the civilian position and the sniper hide site. Without her rifle keeping them honest, they would quickly overwhelm the trapped civilians. Santos put her crosshairs on an insurgent who was maneuvering to get a clear shot at the truck. The man was crawling between rocks. Try to stay low. Santos waited patiently for him to expose himself. When he finally raised his head to look toward the truck, her rifle cracked. The insurgent slumped forward and lay still. "Nice shot," Mitchell commented, then immediately returned his attention to his own sector. "But they're still coming. I count at least 8 on our eastern flank, maybe more." The insurgents were getting smarter about their approach. They were using suppressive fire now, having one group spray bullets at the ridge while another group advanced. Santos had to stay low more often, which meant fewer opportunities to engage targets. During one particularly intense barrage, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. It was the distinctive whoosh of an RPG being fired. She looked up just in time to see the rocket-propelled grenade streak toward the stalled truck. The explosion erupted in a cloud of smoke and debris just 20 meters from the civilians. The concussion wave rolled across the valley floor, and Santos could see the people behind the truck thrown to the ground by the blast. When the smoke cleared, they were all moving, but she could tell some were injured. "They've got RPGs," she reported into her radio. "Civilians have taken casualties. We need those reinforcements now." Control's response was maddeningly calm. "Overlook, reinforcements are still 15 minutes out. Continue to maintain Overwatch." 15 minutes. Santos checked her ammunition again. 3 magazines left for the rifle, plus her sidearm. Mitchell was down to 4 magazines for his M4. At their current rate of fire, they would be out of ammunition long before help arrived. Another RPG whooshed across the valley, this one aimed directly at Santos's position. She and Mitchell pressed themselves flat against the rocky ground as the warhead exploded against the cliff face 30 meters below them. Rock fragments peppered their hide sight, and dust filled the air. "They've got our range," Mitchell coughed, spitting out dust. "Next one's going to be closer." Santos was already moving, leopard crawling to a different firing position 15 meters to the north. She had identified this backup position during their initial reconnaissance, knowing they might need to displace under fire. Mitchell followed, bringing both radios and most of their remaining ammunition. From a new position, Santos had a slightly different angle on the valley floor. She could see that the situation for the civilians was deteriorating rapidly. The insurgents were no longer content to simply pin them down. They were actively maneuvering to overrun the truck position. A group of 5 insurgents was working their way down the western slope, using a dried stream bed for concealment. Once they reached the valley floor, they would have a clear path to the civilians' position. Santos began engaging them systematically, her rifle's thunderous report echoing off the surrounding peaks. The first insurgent dropped immediately, tumbling down the rocky slope. The second went to ground, seeking cover among the boulders. Santos waited, her crosshairs steady on the spot where she had last seen him. When he finally moved, trying to reach better cover, her rifle barked again. He fell and didn't get up. The remaining 3 insurgents in the stream bed began laying down suppressive fire, spraying bullets wildly in Santos's direction. Their shots were poorly aimed, but the volume of fire forced her to keep her head down. While she was pinned, she could see other insurgents moving to flank the civilian position. "Mitchell, I need you to suppress that stream bed," she called out. "I can't engage the flankers while they're keeping me pinned down." Mitchell immediately shifted his fire to the western slope, sending controlled bursts into the dried stream bed. His accurate fire forced the insurgents to take cover, giving Santos the opportunity to refocus on the immediate threat to the civilians. She swung her rifle toward the valley floor, where 2 insurgents were sprinting across open ground toward the truck. They were moving fast, betting that they could reach cover before Santos could engage them. It was a bad bet. Her first shot dropped the leading insurgent mid-stride. He tumbled forward, his AK-47 skittering across the rocky ground. The second insurgent dove for cover behind a small boulder, but it wasn't large enough to protect him completely. Santos could see his foot sticking out. She adjusted her aim and fired. The man screamed and rolled out from behind the rock, clutching his wounded leg. Mitchell finished him with a burst from his M4. The truck driver was still frantically trying to restart his engine. Santos could hear the starter motor grinding away, but the engine wouldn't catch. The old man was beginning to panic, turning the key over and over while bullets sparked off the metal around him. "Come on, start," Santos whispered, as if her will alone could bring the engine to life. A woman's voice carried across the valley, speaking rapidly in Pashto. Santos didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. She was trying to calm the children, telling them everything would be okay, even as bullets whined overhead. Santos felt a familiar rage building inside her. These were innocent people caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The insurgents didn't care about rules of engagement or civilian casualties. They would kill everyone in that truck without hesitation if they got the chance. Her rifle cracked again, dropping an insurgent who was trying to get a clear shot at the truck from the eastern ridge. Then, again, engaging a fighter who was maneuvering through the rocks on the opposite slope. Each shot was motivated by more than tactical necessity. Each shot was personal. "Santos," Mitchell called out during a brief lull in the firing. Look at the northern approach. She turned her scope toward the area Mitchell had indicated and felt her heart sink. A new group of insurgents was approaching from the north, at least a dozen fighters moving in a loose skirmish line. They were fresh troops, probably held in reserve until now. "Control, this is Overlook," she transmitted. "We have additional hostiles approaching from the north. Estimate 12 to 15 fighters. Our position is about to be overrun." The response came back immediately. "Overlook, reinforcements are 10 minutes out. Apache gunships are spinning up now. Can you mark the target area with smoke?" Santos looked at her remaining smoke grenades. She had 2 left, which meant she could mark the insurgent positions for the incoming air support. But 10 minutes was still an eternity, and the new group of fighters would be on top of them long before the helicopters arrived. "Mitchell, pop smoke on the northern group," she ordered. "I'll keep working the valley." Mitchell pulled the pin on a red smoke grenade and hurled it toward the approaching insurgents. The canister bounced among the rocks and began billowing crimson smoke, clearly marking the enemy position for the incoming air support. Santos returned her attention to the valley floor, where the situation was reaching a critical point. The insurgents were massing for a final assault on the truck position, and she could see at least 20 fighters preparing to rush across the open ground. The truck engine suddenly roared to life. The driver had finally managed to get it started. Santos could hear cheering from the civilians as the vehicle lurched forward, beginning to move down the mountain road towards safety. But the insurgents weren't going to let them escape that easily. Santos could see fighters sprinting to cut off the truck's escape route, while others prepared to fire RPGs at the moving vehicle. Her rifle thundered repeatedly as she engaged target after target. An insurgent with an RPG went down just as he was raising the weapon to his shoulder. A fighter trying to block the road tumbled backward as Santos's bullet found its mark. Another insurgent fell as he attempted to get a clear shot at the truck's tires. The truck was picking up speed now, bouncing and swaying as it navigated the rough mountain road. Santos could see the gray-haired driver hunched over the steering wheel, concentrating on keeping the vehicle on the narrow track while bullets struck the ground around him. "They're going to make it," Mitchell said, a note of amazement in his voice. But Santos wasn't celebrating yet. The insurgents who had been advancing on her position were getting dangerously close, and she was down to her last 2 magazines for the rifle. The northern group was less than 200 meters away now, moving fast despite the smoke that still marked their position. "Time to go," Mitchell said, shouldering his pack. Santos fired her last shot from her current magazine and began reloading. Not yet. The truck isn't clear, and there are still insurgents in position to hit it. She chambered around and put her eye back to the scope. The truck was rounding a bend in the road, almost out of sight. Just a few more seconds, and the civilians would be safe. An insurgent popped up from behind a boulder, shouldering an RPG and aiming at the disappearing truck. Santos's crosshairs found him instantly. Her rifle cracked, and the RPG round flew harmlessly into the sky as the insurgent collapsed. "Now we go," she said, slinging her rifle across her back. The sound of rotor blades was beginning to echo off the mountain peaks. The Apache gunships were finally approaching, their distinctive thump, thump, thump growing louder by the second. Santos and Mitchell began bounding backward from their position, using fire and movement to break contact with the advancing insurgents. Santos's rifle continued to bark as she provided covering fire for Mitchell's movement. Then he would return the favor as she bounded to the next position. It was a fighting withdrawal, trading space for time as they waited for the air support to arrive. The first Apache crested the ridge just as Santos reached their rally point 200 meters back from their original hide site. The helicopter's 30mm chain gun immediately opened fire, sending streams of high-explosive rounds into the insurgent positions. The effect was immediate and devastating. Santos watched through her scope as the insurgents who had been advancing on her position scattered, seeking whatever cover they could find from the aerial onslaught. Those who were caught in the open simply disappeared, vaporized by the Apache's tremendous firepower. "Overlook, this is Reaper 1-7," came the voice over the radio. "We have you in sight. Are you in a safe position?" Santos keyed her radio. "Reaper 1-7, we are clear of the target area. Prosecute all targets marked with red smoke." "Roger that, Overlook. Thanks for marking the targets. We'll take it from here." The second Apache arrived and began working over the insurgent positions with methodical precision. Hellfire missiles streaked from the aircraft, exploding among the rocks where the enemy had taken cover. The 30mm guns chattered continuously, their rounds sparking off stone and raising clouds of dust. Santos finally allowed herself to relax slightly as she watched the air attack. The immediate crisis was over. The civilians had escaped, the insurgent force was being systematically destroyed, and ground reinforcements will be arriving soon to mop up any survivors. "Not bad for a morning's work," Mitchell commented, checking his ammunition. He was down to his last magazine. Santos nodded, then keyed her radio one more time. "Control, this is Overlook. Civilian convoy is clear of the area. Enemy force is neutralized. Request permission to return to base." "Roger, Overlook. Well done. Ground reinforcements will link up with you in 5 minutes for extraction." Santos looked back at the valley where the whole fight had taken place. The truck was long gone, disappearing down the mountain road towards safety. The insurgent ambush had been broken, their fighters scattered or dead. It had been closer than she liked to think about, but they had accomplished their mission. Her rifle was still warm in her hands, and the smell of gunpowder hung in the air around their position. In less than an hour, she had fired more shots in combat than in all her previous deployments combined. But every shot had mattered, every bullet had made the difference between life and death for the innocent people caught in the crossfire. The sound of approaching vehicles reached their ears. The ground reinforcements were finally arriving, though they were no longer needed for the fight. Santos slung her rifle and prepared to move out, already thinking about the after-action report she would have to write. But first, she allowed herself a moment to feel satisfied with what they had accomplished. When the civilians in that truck told their story, they would remember 2 American soldiers on a ridge who had stood between them and death. That was worth all the ammunition they had expended, worth all the risk they had taken. Santos's thunderous rifle had spoken from the ridge, and innocent lives had been saved. In her book, that was what being a soldier was all about. 3 days later, Santos sat in the debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Chapman, staring at the official report that described the ambush in clinical military language. The words on the page seemed inadequate to capture what had really happened on that ridge. Phrases like enemy casualties estimated at 35 to 40 and civilian assets successfully extracted reduced the intensity of the firefight to dry statistics. Colonel Martinez, the battalion commander, looked up from his copy of the report. He was a career infantry officer who had seen his share of combat, but even he seemed impressed by what Santos and Mitchell had accomplished. Staff Sergeant Santos, according to the Apache pilots, they counted at least 28 confirmed enemy Kia in the immediate target area, Martinez said. The pilots estimate you were responsible for approximately 15 to 18 of those kills, firing from a fixed position under heavy fire for over 40 minutes. Santos nodded, but said nothing. She didn't feel like celebrating the body count. Every shot she had fired was necessary, but that didn't make it easier to think about. The Afghan National Police recovered the civilian truck 3 hours later, Martinez continued. 7 people in that vehicle, including 3 children. The driver, Muhammad Ahmadi, specifically asked to thank the American soldiers who saved his family. That got Santos's attention. She looked up from the report. "Is he okay? I saw him take some shrapnel from that first RPG. Minor cuts and bruises. His wife had a concussion from the blast, but she's fine. The children were scared but unharmed." Martinez paused, studying Santos's face. Ahmadi said something interesting when the ANP interviewed him. He said he could hear your rifle firing the whole time they were trapped, and it gave him hope. He knew someone was fighting for them. Santos felt a tightness in her throat. She had been focused on the tactical situation during the firefight, thinking about angles and ranges and ammunition counts. She hadn't really considered what it must have been like for the civilians, listening to the battle rage around them while they huddled behind a broken truck. "There's something else," Martinez said, pulling out a folder marked with classification stamps. "Intelligence believes this wasn't a random ambush. The insurgents were specifically targeting that truck." Santos frowned. "Why? It looked like a normal civilian convoy to me." Muhammad Ahmadi isn't just a truck driver. He's a former Afghan army interpreter who worked with American forces for 3 years before retiring. Intelligence indicates that Taliban commanders had put a bounty on his head. His family has been getting death threats for months. The pieces suddenly clicked into place for Santos. The size of the insurgent force, their sophisticated positioning, the way they had reserves standing by. It hadn't been a target of opportunity. It had been a planned execution. "They were going to kill his whole family," she said quietly. Martinez nodded grimly, "including his 3 children, ages 6, 8, and 10. Santos stared at the report again, but now the dry military language carried new weight. Those civilian assets, successfully extracted, were a father trying to protect his family from revenge killing, a mother, and 3 small children whose only crime was loving a man who had helped American soldiers. "There's going to be a ceremony," Martinez continued. "Division wants to recognize what you and Corporal Mitchell accomplished up there. The Bronze Star with V device for both of you." Santos looked up sharply. The Bronze Star with V device was awarded for heroism in combat. It was a significant decoration, one that would follow her for the rest of her career. "Sir, we were just doing our job." "No, Staff Sergeant, you were doing much more than your job," Martinez replied firmly. "Your job was to provide overwatch for a routine patrol. When the situation developed, you could have called for immediate extraction. Instead, you chose to remain in an exposed position against overwhelming odds to protect civilians." Mitchell, who had been sitting quietly throughout the briefing, finally spoke up. "Sir, what about Lieutenant Thompson's patrol? We lost radio contact during the fight." Martinez's expression grew serious. "Thompson's squad hit an IED 10 minutes after you made contact. 2 wounded, but everyone made it out alive. They were pinned down by small arms fire for over an hour, which is why they couldn't reach your position." Santos felt a chill run through her. She and Mitchell had been completely alone on that ridge, with no possibility of immediate support. If they had known that at the time, would they have made the same choice to stay and fight? She realized the answer was yes. Even knowing they were on their own, even knowing the odds against them, they would have stayed. Those children in the truck deserved to grow up, deserved to have a future free from the hatred that had put a price on their father's head. "When is the ceremony?" Mitchell asked. "Next week. Division commander is flying in personally to present the awards." Martinez closed the folder. "There's one more thing. Muhammad Ahmadi has requested permission to attend the ceremony. He wants to thank you both in person." Santos felt that tightness in her throat again. She had never met any of the people she had protected during her deployments. They were always distant figures seen through a rifle scope or glimpsed during patrol operations. The idea of actually meeting the family she had saved felt overwhelming. "Does he understand the security risks?" she asked. If Taliban commanders were willing to set up a 40-man ambush to kill him, they might try again. "He's being relocated with his family to a secure area," Martinez replied. "The Afghan government is providing new identities and protection, but he insisted on attending the ceremony first. He said it was important for his children to see the soldiers who saved their lives." After the debriefing, Santos walked across the base to the communication center. She wanted to call her sister back home in Texas to hear a familiar voice that had nothing to do with firefights and body counts. But when she got the call through, she found herself struggling to explain what had happened. "I can't really talk about the details," she told Maria Elena, who shared her name, but not her profession. "But we had a situation a few days ago. People were in danger, and we had to make some hard choices. Are you okay?" her sister asked, concern evident in her voice despite the crackling satellite connection. Santos considered the question. Was she okay? Physically, she was fine. Not a scratch on her despite 40 minutes of intense combat. Mentally and emotionally, she was still processing what had happened on that ridge. "I'm fine," she said finally. "Just tired. Mom's been worried about you. She keeps asking when you're coming home." Home. Santos tried to imagine being back in San Antonio, sitting in her mother's kitchen, eating breakfast tacos, and watching the morning news. It seemed like another world, one where ambushes and RPGs and children hiding behind broken trucks were just stories on television. "Tell her I'm okay," Santos said. "Tell her I'm doing important work here." After the call, Santos walked to the base gym and found a quiet corner where she could clean her rifle. The M24 had performed flawlessly during the firefight, but it needed maintenance after firing nearly 60 rounds in combat conditions. She broke down the weapon methodically, cleaning each component with the care of someone whose life depended on mechanical reliability. As she worked, she thought about the ceremony Martinez had mentioned. She had never been comfortable with formal recognition, preferring to let her work speak for itself. But this felt different. This wasn't about her. It was about honoring the choice to stand and fight when retreat would have been easier. Mitchell found her in the gym, carrying his own rifle for cleaning. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, each absorbed in the familiar ritual of weapon maintenance. "You thinking about what the colonel said?" Mitchell finally asked. Santos nodded. "About meeting the family?" "Yeah, I'm thinking about it." "You nervous?" "A little. I keep wondering what you say to someone whose life you saved." "You're welcome" seems kind of inadequate. Mitchell smiled grimly. "I don't think they expect speeches. I think they just want to see that we're real people, not just some distant guardian angels on a ridge." Santos considered this as she reassembled her rifle. During the firefight, everything had been about ranges and angles and threat assessment. The civilians had been assets to protect, objectives to secure. But they were also a father who loved his children enough to risk his life helping American soldiers, a mother who comforted her kids while bullets flew overhead, children who deserved to grow up in peace. "You ever wonder why we do this?" she asked Mitchell. He looked up from cleaning his bolt assembly. "The job? The army." This, Santos gestured around them, encompassing the base, the war, the endless cycle of patrols and firefights and debriefings. All of it. Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. "You remember when we were pinned down on that ridge, watching those insurgents getting ready to overrun the truck?" Santos nodded. "I wasn't thinking about democracy or foreign policy or any of that big picture stuff. I was thinking about that old man trying to start his truck while his grandkids were crying behind him. That's why we do this. For moments like that, when ordinary people need someone to stand between them and the wolves." Santos finished reassembling her rifle and worked the bolt to check the action. The weapon felt solid in her hands, ready for whatever came next. She thought about Muhammad Ahmadi and his family, probably sitting in some safe house right now, trying to adjust to the idea that they might actually have a future. "The ceremony's going to be strange," she said. "Yeah, but good strange. How often do you get to meet the people whose lives you saved?" Santos slung her rifle and prepared to head back to her quarters. Tomorrow would bring another patrol, another chance to stand watch over the roads and valleys where innocent people tried to live their lives despite the war raging around them. But tonight, she would try to get some sleep, knowing that somewhere in Afghanistan, 3 children were safe in their beds because 2 soldiers had chosen to stand and fight on a rocky ridge when retreat would have been easier. The ceremony was still 4 days away, but Santos was already thinking about what she would say to Muhammad Ahmadi when she met him. "Thank you for trusting us. Maybe, thank you for risking your life to help American soldiers. Thank you for showing us why this fight matters." Or maybe she wouldn't need to say anything at all. Maybe it would be enough to shake his hand, to see his children smile, to know that her thunderous rifle had spoken at the right moment and in the right place. As she walked across the base in the gathering darkness, Santos could hear the distant sound of helicopters returning from patrol. Another day was ending in Afghanistan. Another day when soldiers and civilians had faced danger together and emerged intact. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patrols, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, Santos felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that her training, her courage, and Her marksmanship had converged at exactly the right moment to save innocent lives. The Bronze Star would be nice, she supposed. But the real reward was knowing that Muhammad Ahmadi's children would grow up free from the shadow of their father's service, protected by soldiers who understood that some things are worth fighting for. The ceremony took place on a clear Tuesday morning, with the Afghan mountains providing a dramatic backdrop to the small gathering on the base parade ground. Santos stood at attention in her dress uniform, feeling uncharacteristically nervous as she watched the division commander's helicopter settle onto the landing pad. General Morrison was a no-nonsense officer who had commanded troops in both Iraq and Afghanistan. His reputation preceded him. A soldier's general who cared more about mission accomplishment than political correctness. When he stepped off the helicopter and approached the assembled troops, Santos could see why his soldiers respected him. Staff Sergeant Santos, Corporal Mitchell, the general said, stopping in front of them. I've read the after-action reports from your engagement. Impressive work under difficult circumstances. Thank you, sir, Santos replied, keeping her eyes focused straight ahead. Morrison studied her for a moment. 43 minutes of sustained combat against a numerically superior force, firing from a fixed position with no possibility of immediate support. Most soldiers would have called for extraction and left the civilians to their fate. Santos didn't respond. There hadn't been a question in the general's statement, and she had learned long ago not to volunteer commentary during formal ceremonies. Do you know why we're here today, Staff Sergeant? Morrison asked. To receive decorations, sir. No, the general said quietly. We're here because 3 children are still alive. We're here because a man who risked his life to help American soldiers gets to watch his family grow up. We're here because sometimes the right people are in the right place at the right time, and they make choices that matter. Colonel Martinez stepped forward with the citation folders. The formal ceremony began with the reading of Santos's Bronze Star citation, describing her actions in the clinical language of military awards. But as the adjutant read the words aloud, Santos found herself thinking not about the firefight, but about what had happened afterward. 2 days earlier, she had received an unexpected visitor. Muhammad Ahmadi had arrived at the base accompanied by an interpreter and 2 Afghan National Police escorts. Santos had been conducting weapons training when word came that he wanted to speak with her. She found him waiting in the base commander's office, a slight man in his 50s with gray in his beard and worry lines around his eyes. When she entered the room, he stood immediately and attempted to salute. Santos quickly gestured for him to stop. Please, sir, that's not necessary, she said through the interpreter. Ahmadi spoke rapidly in Pashto, his voice thick with emotion. The interpreter translated. He says he cannot find words to thank you for what you did. He says his children were crying in the truck, and he was certain they were all going to die. Then he heard your rifle, and he knew someone was fighting for them. Santos had felt that familiar tightness in her throat. Tell him I was just doing my job. But when the interpreter translated her response, Ahmadi shook his head vigorously and spoke again. He says no. You were doing much more than your job. He says you could have left when the shooting started, but you stayed. He says his daughter asks him every night about the soldier on the mountain who saved them. The conversation had continued for nearly an hour. Ahmadi told her about his 3 years as an interpreter, working with American forces to help hunt down Taliban commanders. He described the threats his family had received, the careful planning required for even simple trips to the market, the constant fear that someone would recognize him. He says he knew the risks when he started working with Americans. The interpreter had translated, but he believed it was important to help. He says his country needs peace, and peace requires people to take risks. When Ahmadi left that day, he had pressed something into Santos's hand, a small stone carved with Pashto script. Through the interpreter, he explained that it was a traditional blessing, asking God to protect soldiers who protect the innocent. Santos still carried it in her pocket. Now, standing at attention as General Morrison prepared to pin the Bronze Star on her uniform, Santos thought about that conversation. She had been trained to think tactically, to assess threats, and engage targets with precision. But The real impact of her actions went far beyond military objectives. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, General Morrison announced, for conspicuous gallantry and heroism in action against an armed hostile force. The medal felt heavier than Santos had expected as the general pinned it to her chest. The bronze star suspended from its red, white, and blue ribbon caught the morning sunlight as Morrison stepped back and saluted her. Corporal Jacob Mitchell. Morrison continued, moving to pin Mitchell's medal. For conspicuous gallantry and heroism in action against an armed hostile force. After the formal ceremony, there was a reception in the base dining facility. Santos was surprised to see how many people had attended. Soldiers from other units, support staff, even some of the Afghan interpreters who worked on the base. Word of the firefight had spread, and she realized that their actions had become something of a legend among the troops. She was accepting congratulations from a group of junior enlisted soldiers when she saw him. Muhammad Ahmadi stood near the entrance to the dining hall, wearing traditional Afghan clothes and looking somewhat overwhelmed by the crowd. Behind him were his wife and 3 children, a boy about 10 years old and 2 younger girls. Santos excused herself from the group and walked over to the family. When Ahmadi saw her approaching, his face lit up with a smile that seemed to erase years from his features. Staff Sergeant Santos, he said in heavily accented English. I practice to say thank you in English. Your English is very good, Santos replied, touched by the effort he had made. Ahmadi gestured to his family. My wife Fatima, my son Ahmad, my daughters Aliyah and Zura. Santos knelt down to be at eye level with the children. The youngest girl, who couldn't have been more than 6 years old, stared at her with wide, curious eyes. Through the interpreter, Santos learned that this was Zara, the daughter who asked about the soldier on the mountain every night. Thank you for keeping us safe, Ahmad said in careful English, obviously having practiced the words. Santos felt tears threatening and blinked them back. You're very welcome. You have a brave father. Fatima spoke to the interpreter, who translated. She says she prayed to Allah to send guardian angels to protect her family. She says you and Corporal Mitchell were the answer to her prayers. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of General Morrison, who had come to meet the family personally. Through the interpreter, he assured Ahmadi that the American military would continue to support Afghan nationals who had assisted coalition forces. Your service to our soldiers has not been forgotten, Morrison said. We take care of our allies. As the reception continued, Santos found herself in several conversations about the firefight. Junior soldiers asked for details about the engagement, wanting to learn from her experience. Senior NCOs discussed the tactical lessons that could be applied to future operations. But Santos kept finding her attention drawn back to the Ahmadi family. She watched as the children gradually relaxed in the unfamiliar environment, their natural curiosity overcoming their initial shyness. Ahmad peppered Mitchell with questions about American weapons and tactics, while the girls seemed fascinated by the female soldiers they encountered. Later that evening, after the family had departed under heavy security escort, Santos sat on her bunk looking at the Bronze Star Medal. The decoration was beautiful, expertly crafted, but it felt somehow inadequate to represent what had happened on that ridge. Mitchell appeared in the doorway of her quarters. Mind if I come in? Sure. Santos made room for him on the narrow bunk. They sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Mitchell spoke. That was surreal. Meeting them, I mean. Santos nodded. I keep thinking about something Zara said. The interpreter told me. She asked why the soldiers on the mountain were shooting at the bad men instead of running away. What did her father tell her? That some people choose to be brave when others need help. That is what good people do. Mitchell considered this. Think that's what we did? Chose to be brave. Santos turned the question over in her mind. During the firefight, she hadn't felt particularly brave. She had felt focused, determined, maybe a little angry at the insurgents who were trying to murder innocent people. But brave? I think we chose to stay when leaving would have been easier, she said finally. I think we chose to fight when fighting was dangerous. Maybe that's the same thing. The colonel said intelligence believes there were over 50 insurgents involved in that ambush, Mitchell added. They found more weapons caches after the Apache strikes. 50 insurgents against 2 American soldiers. Santos had known the odds were bad during the fight, but she hadn't realized how bad. If even half of those fighters had concentrated on overrunning their position instead of pursuing the civilians, she and Mitchell would probably be dead. "We got lucky," she said. "Maybe. Or maybe we were exactly where we needed to be, doing exactly what we needed to do." Mitchell stood to leave. Either way, those kids get to grow up now. That's ought to count for something. After he left, Santos lay on her bunk staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring another patrol, another opportunity to make a difference in a war that sometimes seemed endless. But tonight, she thought about 3 children who would sleep safely because 2 soldiers had chosen to stand, and fight when retreat would have been easier. The Bronze Star was a nice recognition, but the real reward was knowing that her marksmanship and courage had converged at exactly the right moment to change the trajectory of an entire family's life. Muhammad Ahmadi's children would grow up free from the shadow of their father's service, protected by soldiers who understood that some fights are worth the risk. Santos reached in her pocket and felt the carved stone Ahmadi had given her. The Pashto blessing for soldiers who protect the innocent. She didn't need to understand the words to comprehend their meaning. Some things transcended language, culture, and politics. Her thunderous rifle had barked from the ridge that day, and innocent lives had been saved. In a war full of ambiguous victories and unclear objectives, that was something concrete, something real, something worth the weight of bronze and ribbon on her chest. As she drifted off to sleep, Santos could hear the distant sound of helicopters heading out on night patrol. Somewhere in the mountains, other soldiers were standing watch, ready to make the same choice she had made when innocent people needed protection. The war would continue, but tonight at least she knew why she was fighting. 6 months later, Santos found herself back in the United States, standing in the kitchen of her childhood home in San Antonio. The Bronze Star sat in a shadow box on the mantel, flanked by her other service ribbons and military photographs. But the medal that meant the most to her remained hidden in her jewelry box upstairs, a small carved stone with a Pashto blessing for soldiers who protect the innocent. The transition from combat to civilian life had been more difficult than she expected. The hypervigilance that had kept her alive in Afghanistan made grocery stores feel threatening and crowded restaurants unbearable. She found herself instinctively cataloging exit routes and potential cover positions wherever she went. Her mother, Elena Santos, bustled around the kitchen preparing lunch with the determined cheerfulness of someone trying to pretend everything was normal. She had been making Santos's favorite foods for 3 days straight, as if enough tamales and menudo could somehow erase the war from her daughter's mind. "Mija, you're too skinny," Elena said, not for the first time that week. "Didn't they feed you over there?" "They fed us fine, Mama," Santos replied, accepting another plate of food she wasn't particularly hungry for. "I just got used to eating less." The truth was more complicated. Santos had lost weight not from poor nutrition, but from stress, from the constant alertness required in a combat zone, from the adrenaline that had become as familiar as breathing. Food had become fuel rather than pleasure, something consumed quickly between patrols and missions. Elena studied her daughter's face with the penetrating gaze that only mothers possess. "You having trouble sleeping?" Santos considered lying, but her mother would see through it anyway. "Some. It's getting better." It wasn't getting better. Santos rarely slept more than 4 hours at a stretch, and when she did sleep, her dreams were filled with the sound of rifle fire echoing off mountain peaks. She would wake in a cold sweat, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there, listening for sounds of incoming mortars that existed only in her memory. The doorbell rang, saving Santos from further interrogation about her sleep habits. She heard her sister Maria, Elena, answering the door, followed by an excited conversation in rapid Spanish. A moment later, Mitchell appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing civilian clothes and grinning broadly. "Hey, Santos, Hope you don't mind me dropping by. Santos felt genuinely happy for the first time in weeks. Mitchell, what are you doing here? I'm stationed at Fort Sam now. Thought I'd look you up. He accepted Elena's immediate offer of food with the enthusiasm of someone who had been living on base chow. Mrs. Santos, this is amazing. Maria never told me her mom was such a good cook. Elena beamed at the compliment and immediately began loading another plate with tamales. Santos marveled at how easily Mitchell slipped into the family dynamic. He had always been good with people, able to adapt to any social situation with natural charm. After lunch, Santos and Mitchell walked through the neighborhood where she had grown up. The streets seemed smaller than she remembered, the houses closer together. Everything felt compressed, constrained after months of vast Afghan landscapes and endless mountain horizons. How are you adjusting? Mitchell asked as they paused at a small park where Santos had played as a child. Santos sat on a swing that seemed ridiculously small for her adult frame. It's harder than I expected. Everything feels different. Different how? Santos struggled to find the words. In Afghanistan, everything mattered. Every decision could mean life or death. Here, people argue about parking spaces and complain about their coffee being too cold. It feels like they're living in a different world. Mitchell sat on the swing next to her. Maybe they are. Maybe we are too now. They swung gently, lost in their own thoughts. A group of children ran past, laughing and chasing a soccer ball. Santos watched them and thought about Ahmad, Aliyah, and Zara Ahmadi. She wondered if they were somewhere safe, playing games and laughing like these children. I got a letter, Mitchell said suddenly. Santos looked at him. From who? Muhammad Ahmadi. He tracked down my address somehow. Mitchell pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. He sent pictures of his kids starting school in their new home. They're living in Germany now, refugee status approved. Santos felt a warmth spread through her chest. They made it out. Yeah, and get this, Ahmad wants to be a soldier when he grows up. Says he wants to protect people like we did. The image of the 10-year-old boy she had met at the ceremony, now safely attending school in Germany and dreaming of following in their footsteps, made Santos smile for the first time in days. There's something else, Mitchell continued. Ahmadi's working as a translator for the German military now. Says he wants to keep helping soldiers until Afghanistan is safe for his children to return. Santos thought about this. A man who had already risked everything for his family was continuing to serve, continuing to put himself in danger because he believed in something larger than his own safety. It was a reminder of why their actions on that ridge had mattered. You ever think about going back? Mitchell asked. To Afghanistan? Every day. Santos surprised herself with the honesty of her answer. I know that sounds crazy, but it doesn't sound crazy. I think about it too. Not because I miss the war, but because I miss feeling like what I was doing mattered. Santos nodded. That was exactly it. In Afghanistan, her skills had purpose, her training had meaning. Every shot fired in anger was in defense of something worth protecting. Here at home, those same skills felt irrelevant, even dangerous. The Army wants me to become an instructor, Mitchell continued. Sniper school at Fort Benning. They want me to train the next generation of marksmen. That's a good opportunity. You'd be good at it. Maybe. But it feels like stepping back from the real fight, you know? Teaching people to do what we've already done instead of doing it ourselves. Santos understood the conflict. There was honor in passing on skills to younger soldiers, but it also felt like admitting that their time as active warriors was over, that the war would continue without them. What about you? Mitchell asked. Any plans? Santos had been avoiding that question for weeks. The Army had offered her several options: instructor positions, staff assignments, even the possibility of attending college with full military support. All good opportunities that would advance her career and provide stability. I don't know, she admitted. Everything feels like it's moving away from what we did over there. Desk jobs, teaching assignments, administrative work. Nothing that feels like it has the same urgency. They sat in silence, watching the children play. Santos thought about the paradox of their situation. They had succeeded beyond all expectations in Afghanistan, proven themselves in the most demanding circumstances possible. But that very success had changed them in ways that made it difficult to fit back into normal life. A month later, Santos received her own letter from Muhammad Ahmadi. It was written in careful English, with help from his eldest son Ahmad. "Dear Staff Sergeant Santos," the letter began. "I hope this letter finds you in good health and happiness. My family and I think of you and Corporal Mitchell often. We are safe in Germany now, and my children are attending school and learning German and English. Ahmad asks me every day to tell him the story of the soldiers on the mountain. He is very proud to have been saved by such brave people. He says when he grows up, he wants to be like you, someone who protects families from bad people. I want you to know that what you did that day changed more than just our lives. In our new home, I work with other refugees from Afghanistan. Many of them are families of people who helped American soldiers. When they feel scared or hopeless, I tell them about two soldiers who chose to fight for strangers because it was the right thing to do. Your courage gives hope to many people, not just my family, but all the people who hear our story. They understand that somewhere in the world, there are good people willing to stand up to evil. I know you may think what you did was just your job, but it was more than that. It was a choice to value human life above your own safety. That choice echoes across time and touches lives you will never know. My prayer is that Allah will bless you with peace and happiness. You have earned a right to both. But I also pray that if other families need help, there will be soldiers like you ready to answer the call. With deepest gratitude and respect, Muhammad Ahmadi." Santos read the letter 3 times, feeling tears she had been holding back for months finally starting to flow. She thought about Ahmad wanting to grow up to be like her, about other refugee families drawing hope from her story, about the ripple effects of choices made in split seconds on a mountain ridge. That evening, she called Mitchell. "I've been thinking about what you said about teaching the next generation," she told him. "Yeah, maybe that's not stepping back from the fight. Maybe that's how the fight continues. We train them to make the same choice we made when it matters." Mitchell was quiet for a moment. "You thinking about taking that instructor position?" "Maybe. If I can teach even one sniper to shoot straight when innocent lives are on the line, maybe that multiplies what we did over there." "I like that. We become the reinforcements we wished we'd had." Santos thought about this. They had requested reinforcements that day on the ridge and been told none were available. Now, they had the opportunity to become those reinforcements for the next generation of soldiers who would face similar choices. "There's something else," Santos said. "I want to start a foundation, something to help interpreters and their families who are trying to get out of Afghanistan. People like the Ahmadis who risked everything to help us. That's a hell of an idea. Count me in." 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Santos stood in front of her first class of sniper students at Fort Benning. 20 young soldiers, fresh-faced and eager, stared back at her with a mixture of respect and curiosity that came from knowing their instructor had earned her credentials in combat. "Before we talk about marksmanship fundamentals or ballistics calculations," Santos began, "I want you to understand something about what we do. A sniper's first responsibility is not to the mission or to the unit. It's to the innocent people who can't protect themselves. I'm going to tell you a story about a morning in Afghanistan when my spotter and I were watching a mountain road. It was supposed to be a routine patrol, but routine doesn't exist in combat. What matters is what you do when routine becomes life or death for people who are counting on you." As she spoke, Santos could see the students leaning forward, absorbing not just the tactical lessons, but the moral weight of their chosen profession. These young soldiers would deploy to dangerous places, would face impossible choices, would have to decide in split seconds whether to risk everything for strangers. Her job was to prepare them not just with marksmanship skills, but with the understanding that their rifles might be the only thing standing between innocent people and death. That sometimes when reinforcements are not coming and the odds are overwhelming, the right choice is to stay and fight anyway. "The thunderous bark of a sniper rifle," Santos concluded her first lecture, "is more than just a sound of war. Sometimes it's the sound of hope. The sound that tells innocent people that someone is fighting for them, that they are not forgotten, that good people still choose courage over comfort. Your job is to make sure that when that sound is needed most, it comes from the right place at the right time. Because somewhere out there, someone's children are counting on you to make the choice we made, to stand and fight when running would be easier. As the students filed out for their first practical exercise, Santos felt the same sense of purpose she had experienced on that Afghan ridge. She was still fighting the same fight, just in a different way. Training the reinforcements that would answer the call when innocent people needed protection. Her thunderous rifle no longer barked from mountain ridges, but its echo would continue in the weapons of every student she trained, every sniper she prepared for the moment when courage would matter most. Muhammad Ahmadi's children were safe in Germany, but there were other children, other families, other innocent people who would need protection. And Santos was making sure that when their moment came, there would be soldiers ready to make the right choice. The fight continued, and she was still part of it. That was enough.